This is Year0, AppSec at a startup. So a little bit about me. I got my start in security like a lot of people do, doing security consulting. I did mostly web app pen testing, but it's a pretty small security consulting company that most people haven't heard of. So if you've ever worked somewhere like that, you'll probably know that went on site, did all sorts of engagements, did external network assessments, basically anything that somebody paid us to do, we would figure out how to do it. That was when I was still living in Santa Barbara, and I helped found the Santa Barbara OWASP chapter. I've been an organizer of the AppSec California conference since the beginning, and now that I live in San Francisco, I help organize for the Bay Area OWASP chapter. After leaving Redspin, I actually joined the sales engineering team at BugCrowd, so I jumped over to the vendor side for a couple of years and helped a bunch of companies run bug bounty programs. And then most recently, about a year ago, I left to join Segment. So as was said during the introduction, we do cloud security, AppSec, ProdSec, kind of just anything in that realm. So the slides are online, so if there's anything that you like, you don't need to take a picture of it. You can take a picture of this slide if you want to go and look at stuff later. If you're questioning whether or not it's worth it to take out your phone, I do have another slide at the very end with this link too. So if you feel like you messed up, then you have another opportunity. Like everybody else on InfoSec, I'm on Twitter. I crave validation from social media, so if you follow me, it'll make me happy. So here are some of the main topics we're going to talk about. Building a team, shifting left towards developers, what we've done to create AppSec training that people actually like taking. One of our engineers here, Ray, took it. I paid him to come here and be an audience plant. I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach to threat modeling, what we look for in vendors that we like to partner with, our engineering embed program, and then some other things that we're either in the middle of working on or haven't gotten started on but are excited about. So this was something that was kind of talked about a little bit in the keynote that I think is really important, is you need organizational buy-in to be successful as a security team. And that's not just from the top down or the bottom up. You need everybody to care about security. And the only way that this is going to happen is if you have executive buy-in and action. So at a lot of our engineering all hands and company all hands, we have people from our executive suite or our head of security that are getting up in front of our whole company and telling people why this is important. You need to especially be friends with your engineers and engineering managers, because they're the ones that are going to fix most of the vulnerabilities. They have to do patching, they have to do reviews where they're thinking about security. So getting time from them is definitely vital to having a successful program. And lastly, as most of you know here, security people cost a lot of money, so you need to have your program well supported financially. And the only way to do that is to have a head of security that can sell the value of a good security program to people that make financial decisions, so usually people towards the top of the company. You also need to build a team. Like, you're not going to be able to get stuff done if you just don't have anybody working with you. I think that's something that a lot of companies struggle with, but Segment has actually been pretty successful with. When I joined about a year ago, there were 2 people before me, and then there was basically 3 of us that all started kind of within the same month. And now we're up over 10 people. So some of the stuff that I think has really helped attract people to come work at Segment is hosting, speaking, sponsoring meetups. A lot of regional conferences and security meetups are always in need of people to speak and sponsor and potentially host. We've hosted a number of OWASP meetups, and it's only about $1,000 a meetup to have a bunch of people come hang out in your office for a few hours, talk with you, learn what you're doing with your security team. And OWASP is a great organization. I think that we've derived a ton of value from OWASP over our careers. Doing things like this, attending conferences is great. I meet tons of people at conferences, and having people, that inevitably at some point are going to be looking for a job, knowing that you have a security team that they're interested in being a part of. Like I kind of doubt that Netflix needs to do any recruiting for their security team. I think everyone just wants to work there already. Also, you need to tap into your network. Just find people that you want to work with and then recruit them. Most companies do have a bonus for recruiting people, so it's a good way to make some money too. But honestly, like having people that you love working with makes a huge difference to like how happy you are at work. This is a talk that my boss gave, which is actually how I first heard about her. It was at B-Sides a couple of years ago, and I was there as an attendee, and I saw this talk, and I was like, that's somebody that I would want to work for. And then a year later, I was applying to work at Segment because of this person. So I would definitely recommend watching this if you're interested in building a security team. I think that open source contributions are really important too. We have somebody on our team that is a Zap core maintainer, and that's definitely something that people have brought up in interviews about like why they were interested in working at Segment. Segment as a whole has a pretty strong open source culture. A lot of this, stuff that the security team is doing, the greater engineering org is also doing. Like a lot of people write blogs and speak at meetups, and I would definitely encourage more people to do that, because sharing the knowledge that you've learned from your companies really helps accelerate the whole industry. Like a lot of what I've learned has been from attending events like this. You also need to be friends with your recruiters. I cannot emphasize this enough. Recruiters are the first people that a lot of people talk to when they're thinking about joining a company. And there was a company that I ended up getting an offer from, and it was the first company that I applied to when I was looking for a job, but it took them so long to get to that point. Then I started exploring other options, and I'm glad that I did, because I wouldn't have applied to Segment otherwise. But yeah, recruiters can totally make or break your ability to build a team. I would also encourage, if you do meet people, try and follow up with them. One of the things that we've gotten a lot of value from is actually just like meeting one-on-one with other security teams. So we'll try and like grab lunch, like a longer lunch or something with another team that's like local to where we're at. And it's a great way to just exchange information and talk about things a little bit more privately. I'd say that even though a lot of security people are like kind of guarded publicly, like if you are just working with them like person to person, like a lot of them will actually kind of tell you pretty much anything. So yeah, that's been pretty valuable for us. So no matter how successful you are building a team, you need for security to shift left. Who's seen this movie? Okay, good. At least a couple people have seen it. I just think that as FIFO goes west, security goes left. I just love that, and so I had to put it in there. But you need to expand your security team beyond your security team. And the most important people in terms of like a SaaS business are developers. And they're the ones that are finding vulnerabilities earlier or not writing them. I think everybody has seen this graph. You want to find bugs on the left side because it's a lot cheaper. You don't have to disrupt a developer who's in the middle of something else to say, hey, we need you to fix something that made it into our production code base. It's also important because developers want to write good software. I think most developers are pretty smart people. Like they want to be known for writing good software. And so you need to start introducing this idea or emphasizing this idea if it's already present that secure software is part of it's part of good software. It's the same thing as having scalable design or good user experience or anything like that. It's no different than any other like fundamental component of having good software. And to do that, developers have to be security minded, which is where you as a security professional come in. It's your job to help them be able to think about security in the appropriate ways. And we're not going to be there for every pull request. We're not pair programming with every developer. We've been successful at building a team, but there's no way that we could scale or make the case for needing like a 1-to-1 ratio. Like that would be insane. We're not helicopter parents. We just need to give people the tools and the knowledge to be able to make decisions on their own. So the first way that most developers interact with the security team is actually through our training. We try and have everyone go through our training during their first month of employment. Who here has worked at a company that makes people do security training? Who's given training that devs are actually excited for? A lot of it is like buying something that's like not custom and is like some boring online slideshow or something like that. And while that's really convenient for the security team, you're missing a lot of opportunities to build relationships with people early in their career at your company. So our training is broken up into two parts. Part one is think like an attacker. This is where we cover common vulnerability types, and we also talk about how to find them. And then part two is secure code review. And so this is where we reinforce concepts from part one of the training and give people checklists and resources to be able to identify vulnerabilities in pull review or pull requests. So the most important thing I think for think like an attacker for the first part is creating relevant content. None of this stuff is canned examples. Like every single vulnerability that we talk about is something that's been submitted to us either through our bug bounty program or from a pen test or something that somebody has found internally. It's a lot easier to get people to care about your training if you're using examples that they understand because it's part of the business they're working at. I think everyone's probably heard of like the classic bank CSRF example where you're like getting somebody to transfer money to this account. But it's like, if I'm a developer working at Segment, it's like, I don't work at this dumb bank, like I work at Segment. So having stuff that's relevant is really important. We also use this time to introduce the Bug Crowd VRT. The Bug Crowd VRT has a pretty good classification of different vulnerability types. It also has a priority rating scale. We introduced this not just to tell them like, hey, we're running a bug bounty program, like people are always looking for this stuff, we have to pay for it if they do find it. But it also shows like, hey, we're using a third-party open source rating scale to categorize these vulnerabilities. Like we're not just saying like, oh, this is critical, you need to fix it. Like we're trying to align with something that like people across the industry are contributing to. So if you want to run a training that's similar to this, the pre-training setup is send out an email telling people to install OWASP Juice Shop and Burp Suite. You could use Zap if you wanted to, but I don't know how to use Zap, so I'm not going to train people on Zap. And then send out another email the day of because people didn't pay attention to your first email. Having people set up stuff in advance is really important because if they show up to the training and it's not set up, then they spend the first 10 minutes of the training setting stuff up instead of listening to you. It's also great if you reach out to people and say, hey, you know, if you need help with any of this stuff, like come to the security pod, like we'll sit down with you for 5 minutes and get this set up. And it shows like, hey, you know, we're here, whatever you need from the security team, like we're here to help you out. We picked OS Juice Shop because it's pretty similar to our own like web infrastructure. We use Node, we use React instead of Angular. You know, we use different database, but like generally speaking, like the single page app style is pretty familiar to our developers. So that's why we picked Juice Shop. This is the general schedule for the training. We'll talk about two types of vulnerabilities. We'll have slides and examples. And then we'll have an interactive training with Burp Suite and Juice Shop where we'll ask them to find vulnerabilities that are similar to the type that we just talked about. And then we'll do this again and, you know, we'll do this repeatedly. As part of the training, we also write everybody's name who finds vulnerabilities up on a whiteboard. And so this was during like a 2-week session where we were doing like a bunch of trainings to like basically backfill all of the like old developers that hadn't gone through training. And then we keep this information on a spreadsheet. This is really important because it turns it into basically like a mini CTF. And during the hacking like lab sections in between the different sections where you're talking about the vulnerabilities, people are actually competing against each other instead of just like slacking and like doing, you know, looking at emails and stuff like that. They like don't want to be the only person who doesn't have their name on the board. I think that this kind of captures like what we're going for in the training is there's all three components. We're up there giving the training in person. There's people or there's slides too to reinforce the stuff that we're talking about. But most importantly, we've made the training hands-on, and I think that that's kind of where it really clicks for people is they're like, oh, finding this stuff actually isn't that hard. Like, I'm somebody who's never done this before, and within 30 minutes, like I'm able to find these kind of vulnerabilities. So I'm going to be more conscious about them in the future. And you know, like any good training, it's not just about like, oh, hey, here's something that's wrong. Here's another thing that's wrong. Like we want to give people information on how to fix stuff, because if you don't fix stuff, you're pretty much just as vulnerable as you were before you knew about it. So you want to we have a big focus on like actually making improvements too. So part 2 of the training, secure code review. This is heavily influenced by the OAuth secure coding cheat sheet. We've tailored it to our technologies, so we use Node, React, GraphQL, and Go, and so all of our training is based off of our core languages. It's not something that we expect people to look at every PR, but it's good for people to have it as a reference. And again, it just like reinforces all the stuff that we talked about in part 1, because I think most people need to hear stuff a few times to like really absorb it, or at least I do. So we talk about cross-site scripting, broken access control, secrets management, error handling. SSRF is a big one. If you're not worried about server-side request forgery, you should be. I think this is something that's gotten really popular. That deserves its own talk, but yeah, if you haven't looked that up, definitely look that up. We also want people to be well-versed in crypto and all the latest trends, defense against the dark web, et cetera. So, if there's other stuff that's relevant, like we try and keep the training up to date, kind of what the keynote speaker was talking about is like you want your training, or you want your security content to be relevant to people. This is an example that my coworker David made, Leif's Hawaiian shirt store. As you can see, I like wearing fun shirts. So he built something using React. And here's just a little snippet of the code. This obviously isn't real code, but it kind of works, I think. So one of the first things you'll see is this cost 10. This is basically allowing you to purchase this item for whatever cost you want. And then arguably more importantly, they're also passing the credit card number as part of the request in the URL, which is a big no-no. And then they also misspelled Hawaiian just by getting it right on the previous slide. But yeah, so these are just some things that we would want somebody to pick out as part of the code review. So who sees something that's wrong with this piece of code? You raise your hand, you have to answer now. Oh no, I'm talking about from a security perspective. Yep, boom. API key in the code and a bad API key. One of the things we talk about is how to properly manage secrets. This is definitely not it. You don't want secrets in code. Does anybody else see something that you... Yep, exactly. So that's base64 encoding. That's not encryption. We don't actually expect our developers to necessarily know like what the base64 library is called. We just want them to know, hey, I see this encrypt thing. I want to at least ask questions about that. And that's kind of where we want them to get after the training, is like at least know like what to look for in the code to dig into, and ask somebody who's more senior on your team, or that somebody who is on the security team. So some of the things that we found are really beneficial is getting to meet engineering hires during their first like few weeks. Show them like, hey, we're normal people just like you. If you need anything from us, hit us up on Slack or come over and talk to us. We obviously want to introduce people to common vulnerability types. A lot of people, this is the first security training that they'll go through, either because they haven't had it before or they're maybe a new grad or something like that. I don't know how many of you did computer science in college. I did computer science in college from pretty decent university, and we had no security classes that were required. So I think that's the state that like most new developers are in too. I think most importantly, and this is something that I stole from a Netflix talk, security judgment. And this is just the idea that developers know what's available to them in terms of knowledge and tooling, and allowing them to start making decisions on their own. So with the like B2A encrypt thing, like I said, don't expect them to necessarily know what B2A is off the top of their head, but they should at least see like, hey, what's this encrypt thing, and like, does it seem to be decent, or like, I'm going to talk to security, or like Google it and see that it's not even encryption. We also want people to start thinking about PRs in new ways. Like I said earlier, we're not reviewing every PR. We're not pair programming with people. They know way more about software development and the languages that we use than the security team does. Like, there's no way for us to stay up and be like experts in all of these languages, so it's up to us to have developers be able to make good decisions on their own. And then most importantly, for the developer side, it's like you want them to have fun. You want them to have good experiences working with you so that when something actually is serious in the future, they're willing to come and talk to you. But don't take my word for it. We've gotten some pretty good reviews from people posting about stuff in Slack. I think this is really important because it gives us good feedback that hey, what we think is cool, other people actually think is cool too. And then this isn't a very big reward, but we do give people these 2 stickers, the I hacked, which is kind of like the I voted sticker, and then the Hacker Man sticker. That's a meme that we use as part of the training, so people that take the training usually like getting those. The next thing I'm going to talk about is threat modeling. If you haven't done threat modeling before, check out this talk from AppSec California from last year. Jonathan is much more of an expert on this field than I am. I'm definitely not an expert on this field, but I know how to go to conferences and watch talks and then tell other people about them. So I think the most important thing about threat modeling for defenders is modern threat modeling looks at a system from an attacker's point of view as opposed to a defender's view. And for a lot of people, that's the first time they've ever done that. A lot of people have built software and been a defender, but they haven't always thought about hey, how can somebody attack this thing that I've been trying to build? It also helps you find bugs early. It helps you define your security requirements as you're building software. It helps you deliver better products and features. Remember, you want to be reinforcing this idea that secure software is just part of building good software, and you want people to be thinking about these things so that they can build good software. We've done it with systems that are already built because a lot of stuff was built before we joined. That's still super valuable too. It's obviously less efficient. Remember this graph I showed you earlier without the fun ladybug? You want to find stuff on the left. If you're finding stuff on the right, that's still good though, because it's still better than somebody else finding it. I'm just going to go over our basics for what our setup for threat modeling looks like. The first step is the engineering team needs to provide the security team with links to repos, architecture diagrams, docs, stuff like that. The security team needs to be able to understand what we're supposed to be threat modeling. For complicated systems, which Segment has a lot of, I think it's worth it to have a pre-meeting where the security team can just kind of level set with the engineers and make sure that they actually know what we're talking about. The last thing we want to do is go into a threat model and be the dumbest people in the room because we just don't know what we're supposed to be talking about. And then kind of most importantly, you want everyone to understand where this fits into the big picture. What are the trust boundaries? How does this interact with other systems? And be able to explain how this system is used. You get bonus points for sure if you can get your engineering managers or product managers involved, because they're the ones that usually set whatever the roadmap is, and they're the ones that you're usually competing with in terms of getting stuff fixed or getting things planned in the feature map. And so it's really helpful for them to be part of this because then they'll start thinking about security as well, and it'll make them easier to prioritize this with other development work. Another important thing is you want to make sure that everyone's thinking about how these threats can negatively impact customers, because that's who we're trying to build a good product for. Security is part of the business, just like any other part. It's we're trying to deliver something awesome for our customers, and part of that is their data being safe. So our general process is we have 2 people from security. We have a leader and a note taker. The leader keeps the conversation moving, but doesn't dominate the conversation. You want to have the engineers doing most of the talking. If security is doing most of the talking, security is talking way too much. You should just be asking questions. You can get stuff wrong on purpose so that people will correct you if they're not talking about things. But yeah, you're just kind of there to keep things going. If you're getting towards the end of the allotted time and there's something big that you think everybody's missed, you should definitely talk about it, but it's better if you can get the engineers to get to that point on their own. The note taker creates an attack tree and an issue spreadsheet, which I'll show examples of on the next 2 slides. So we use a pretty simple issue spreadsheet, just likelihood and severity, pretty much like everybody else. One thing that we do that's a little bit different is instead of just multiplying likelihood by severity, we average them and multiply them by 10 instead. And the reason we do that is so that things that are like high severity but low likelihood still end up being like somewhere in the middle. Like if you have a 2 and a 10, that would be a 6. So like we'll just multiply that by 10 and then that's a 60. And even if something is pretty low likelihood but catastrophic, like you probably at least want to think about building in some mitigations for it versus if you were to, that would be like basically like a green, like a 2 and a 10 would be like a 20. Like otherwise that's going to just be so low. Everyone's just gonna be like, we don't care about that. This is an attack tree from Jonathan's presentation. His was about cryptocurrency stuff. It doesn't really matter like what's in here for this presentation, but basically the idea behind the attack tree is you have the attacker's main goals at the top. So manipulate the market or steal cryptocurrency. And then, over the course of the threat model, there's going to be different things that could potentially get you to those goals. The attack tree is awesome because it shows you how like multiple smaller things can lead to one of those bad events. And then it also saves you work for something like gain exchange access. You don't have to create that tree twice. The software will just like arrange everything so that something that's like a shared possibility for those two goals is in the middle. And we use Plant UML for this. It has a VS Code plugin. Jonathan's presentation just has a sample in it, and we just copied that, and then we just changed the names. And I think that's pretty easy instead of just like having to remember how Plant UML works every time. You're just like, I want to make like a box or a bubble or whatever, and then you just change stuff. So again, this is a great way to meet or re-meet engineers. It gets people, social. You're spending a couple hours in a room together talking about security. I think that's generally positive. There's a great information exchange. Engineers are thinking about security in new ways, but also the security team is learning more about the systems that they're supposed to protect. If you don't understand at least kind of how most of these systems work, it's a lot harder to put in realistic defense measures that aren't going to be horrible for people to use. And then if it's something that's already built, engineers will just uncover bodies that you would have to take a lot longer to find as a security person. Like there's probably already stuff that they're worried about and they're thinking about, and they'll just volunteer it during something like a threat model. And then if it's something that hasn't been built yet, ideally you can find things on that left side of the skateboarding ladybug graph. I think every company ends up buying stuff from vendors. You're not a company that's meant to solve every problem. You're meant to solve like a couple problems really well as a startup and sell those to people. And then you're supposed to buy stuff from other people that have solved other problems well, because we don't have time to solve every security problem. A couple things is come up with a consistent evaluation process. Figure out what makes sense to you. Vendors are going to try and influence what makes, what is important to you, because that's how they beat their competition. Sometimes they might be right, but I think that having an evaluation process that you're trying to apply to all vendors in a given area can really help you focus on like what matters. Don't be inflexible though. And then for Segment, we like partnering with vendors that are kind of like a combination of build and buy, where they're solving a core problem, but they have an API that we can build on top of and integrate with our product. And then we also like working with vendors that we can build a good relationship with, because something is going to go wrong. Everything that you purchase, something is going to go wrong with it at some point. And being able to like reach out to somebody and have that person like care about your business and help you fix it is super valuable. And if you're a smaller company that isn't spending a ton of money, there's other ways to give back to vendors that make them like you. Like if you really like a vendor, doing a case study or like doing reference calls is really valuable, especially if it's a smaller company. So one of our examples is, we're looking at static analysis tools. During the process, we're just like, okay, these are all slow. They're built for enterprise, so their specialty is like .NET and Java and like more established languages. Like I said earlier, we're like a Node and Go shop, and there were some options, but they really didn't meet what we were looking for. And then another side effect of being designed for enterprise is they're really expensive. Like we just do not spend crazy amounts of money on something with dubious value the way that an enterprise company will. And then we also just don't want to spend time tuning this stuff. Like we only have a few people on our security engineering team. It's like, I'm not trying to spend 20 hours a week, like managing some tool that it's like, you know, there's other ways that we can invest our time that's better. So we just picked a couple linting rules and we just have those running on like our core repos now. And it's just finding stuff that we know is really easy to find and has like medium to high criticality and called it good enough. So I think as a startup, you need to be really careful about like where your operational time goes, because if you're not, you know, always cognizant of that, it's just going to keep creeping up. And at a certain point, it's like you won't have any time to do project time. And project time is how you reduce operational time in the future by figuring out ways to like automate things or like make things more efficient. So we kind of just didn't buy a SaaS tool. So we just did linting. And then we ended up purchasing something called SNCC to help us find vulnerabilities in our dependencies. We really like SNCC. They've been great to work with. They are similar to like SourceClear and Black Duck and stuff like that. But I'm not really here to talk about them. I'm here to talk about the eval process. So our first round of vetting for all the tools in this area, we wanted something that worked with our languages, something that was fast, something that integrated with GitHub so that our developers can get feedback fast. Our developers are pushing code all the time. They don't like waiting for stuff. Their normal like prod tests for our app take about like 3 minutes to run. So it's like, we're not trying to inject some stuff into their pipeline that's going to slow them down. After we were like, hey, this thing seems pretty cool, we partnered with our app team. I would never recommend buying a tool that you expect your developers to interact with without partnering with at least one development team, because they're going to identify issues or pain points that you might not know about as a security person. If you buy something that sucks and they hate it, they're not going to use it. They're going to figure out a way to not use that thing. Then we presented at Eng All Hands to spread awareness, and we made a guide like, hey, if you want to onboard this, here's how you do it. We submitted pull requests to all of our core repos, so we did like kind of the initial like groundwork. And then, oh, one thing I forgot. So when we did our Eng All Hands presentation, we had people, we made it interactive.
Is that works on source code or?
So it just uses like whatever your package file is. So for Node, it uses your like yarn.lock or package.lock file or your package.json file. And then depends on the language. So like it also uses like our vendor file for Go. So it's kind of different for every language, but it doesn't actually like analyze the source code. It just looks at the dependencies for like what you're pulling into your code. Yeah. So the way that we introduce this, because this stuff sounds like kind of boring to most engineers, I think, we did a Price is Right style guess where it was like, hey, how many Node dependencies do you think we have across all of our repos? Which we have about 1,000 Node repos. And anybody who's worked with Node should know that that number is very high because Node likes dependencies for some reason. And so that's a good way to get people like excited in the beginning. Makes it interactive. Everyone wrote down the number, put it on a piece of paper, and then like handed it over to somebody else besides me that wasn't presenting. And then at the end, we gave that person a crown. So we made it just like silly and fun just to spend a couple minutes introducing something like this. So whenever you're introducing something, try and get people to pay attention to you. And then also we wrote an integration with Directory. Directory is our internal asset management tool. We wanted to have these vulnerabilities be in the same place that a lot of other information lives. So we have like the code repository, Datadog, docs, stuff like that. It's all here. The less we treat security stuff differently, the more relatable you're going to be to the rest of the engineers. So having this type of information be where people are already going for other information is super valuable. Like you don't want to introduce like, oh, just go in and log into this other thing and like look at this information. It's like people don't want to do that. People want to have everything in one place, and then there's links to SNCC. So if there are vulnerabilities here, you can just click them and it'll take you to wherever you need.
Directory is open source.
We should make it open source. I don't think it's very close to being able to be open source, but it's it should be, because like it's a problem that every company has. They're just like, how do we keep track of our stuff? Here's an example of Gateway API. This is kind of like our core web backend. This is something that one of our developers just did proactively. We didn't set like an SLA or like, you know, we didn't say, oh, you need to plan for this as part of your next development cycle. Somebody just took it upon himself when he had a free day to just go in and just remove every vulnerability from that node repo. And he's done it on a couple other ones too, but this one just, I didn't want to have multiple ones on there. But yeah, this is a great example of like making a developer care and having them do things proactively and have them basically be a force multiplier on your security team. Like, we didn't have to do anything. We just partnered with them during the eval process and, you know, made it easy for people to use. And I think developers do want to, you know, do the right thing, generally speaking. I'm going to talk a little bit about our bug bounty program. We've gotten a lot of value from this. Just having people look at our stuff all the time has been super helpful. I think that there's a lot of debate on like when you should start a bug bounty program. I think that depending on how you do it, you can start it kind of whenever you want, as long as you have at least like one person internally that cares about the program. If you are going to start a bug bounty program, I would recommend doing some pre-bounty prep. So what I mean by that is do some reconnaissance on yourself, figure out what's actually out there. I would say that researchers as a whole don't follow scope. I would say that most researchers do follow scope, but there's always going to be a handful of people that are just going to treat anything that you own on the internet as in scope. And so having an idea of what's out there is really good. A great first step is just to replace your security at. Like, we get stuff, we're not even that big of a company, and we get people emailing us all the time about X-frame options and like DMARC stuff, and like I just hate dealing with that stuff. It's like, I love the researcher community, generally speaking, and I hate crap like that. So we outsource management. I would definitely recommend outsourcing management. It's not crazy expensive to just have somebody else deal with it for you. You should start small, both in terms of scope, number of researchers, and like modest rewards. Don't be like super cheap, but you can start out with just like 5 researchers. Like, segments start out with 5 researchers, and then every, you know, week or something we'd add a few more. And then now we just have everyone on BugCrowd who's submitted at least one valid vulnerability just automatically get an invite, basically. I think one of the biggest things, and like all that, those first 3, it's like there's probably been 100 bug bounty presentations on that stuff. So if you've heard that before, I'm sorry. But I think that this is the most important point on this whole slide, is pay for anything that gives value. There's a lot of work in the bug bounty industry that goes into like being a bug bounty researcher, and a lot of it you don't get paid for, whether it's a dupe or you spend time and you don't find anything, or it's like out of scope for whatever that program is and you don't get paid. We will pay for duplicates that are well-written reports. We'll pay for anything where we learn something. If somebody gives us a report where I can easily turn that into a Jira ticket and hand it off to a developer, you just save me so much time versus a report where I have to literally rewrite the whole thing because your reproduction steps are so bad. It's like, I'll pay you extra for that because I want to build a relationship with you, and I want you to keep coming back to our program because you find good stuff and you don't cause a lot of work for me, and I like those things. Our best submissions, anyone who's found a critical submission on Segment has been somebody that was originally a duped researcher that we paid, and then they came back and kept working for the next like few days or week or whatever and uncovered stuff. Like, Segment's pretty complicated. It takes a while for people to figure out like what's a segment, and so we definitely want to encourage people that you know, are good to work with. And then last thing, be clear on what matters. The BugCrowd VRT is great. We also do some customization that lets people know what we care the most about. And so if there's like 2 to 5 things that are like the most core to your business, I would put those in the bounty brief and say, hey, if you can demonstrate a vulnerability in X, Y, and Z, like we'll pay you more than whatever our like normal P1 price range is. And then if you don't have a bounty program, make my stock options worth something. The next thing we're going to talk about is actually just like writing code. This is something that has been a huge benefit for us, is just, we call it full stack security engineering. We're actually not very good full stack engineers. I would say we're just okay, but It's been a really great way to meet developers, designers, and product managers. You're definitely going to get a deeper understanding of the engineering process if you actually build some stuff with engineers. They're going to teach you a ton. Like I said, they are way better at these technologies than we are, and I've learned a ton of stuff working with our app team. You're going to learn more about the code base you're protecting, kind of like what I was talking about with threat modeling. It's a lot easier to protect stuff if you actually know how it works. Oh, I'm behind by one. You also diversify your skill set. I think everybody in the security industry likes learning stuff. If you're not learning stuff all the time, at least I feel like I would be falling behind. So being a better developer is something that's pretty valuable. So I think it's a good way to stretch those skills. So we're working on a security to engineering embed program. We talked with people from Coinbase, Etsy, and Twilio about like how they've done these programs successfully. And here's like kind of a condensed version of that. You need to get appropriate buy-in both from your security manager and from whoever that manager on the team is that you're embedding with. You need to go through the normal design process, because at the end of this, you want them to be able to take over this code. So you want to follow building this exactly the same way that they would. You need to create documentation, you need to write good test cases, you need to follow the normal deployment procedures. You want it so that like when you're done with this code, you can hand this off to the developers and they're like, what's this crap that the security team wrote? That's the opposite. You want them to be like, oh, this is reasonably high quality that we can maintain and build upon. If you're going to do a more formal embed program, we would recommend go and try and sit with that team if they're in your same office, attend their stand-ups, maybe have a one-on-one with their manager periodically if that's appropriate, and then buy them lunch at the end to say like, hey, thanks for reviewing our mediocre security code. A couple options here. Kind of the first one, this is great if you're newer to the team or you're more junior developer, either from a security or software engineering standpoint. Work on bug fixes or small features, something that you're not going to break anything too badly. Maybe pick some like P3s or P4s from your bug bounty program and fix those. When I first started at Segment, I fixed a handful of bugs, and it was a great way to learn more about our app. The second would be to work on like a medium to large non-security feature. So this would be like a good example would be working on something with Directory, that internal tool that our operations team built. That isn't really like a security tool per se, but it's something that we interact with regularly. So it's valuable to know like how to add features to it on our own. And then the third one would be a security related feature. So like two-factor authentication or something like that. This is something that I built that should be getting pushed on Monday. I used the Dropbox ZXC VPN password score meter and the Have I Been Pwned API to let people know, hey, your password's bad, your password's okay, your password's been in a previous breach that wasn't related to Segment. We want to prevent people from like having account takeovers and credential stuffing attacks, because that's a lame way for your users to feel like your website isn't secure. Because I don't want to say it's not your fault, because you could do something to like let them know, but it really is like password reuse is really bad. So I hate that. Again, great way to meet developers. During this process of building that like medium-sized feature, I met with people from our front-end team, from our design team, a couple people that are kind of like on the full stack side. I met with the product manager from the app team. I talked to 2 people from marketing to like make the little learn more thing and like a blog post. I had to get all the language approved by somebody from our copy team. So like most of these people on the right were people that I had never even talked to. And now all those people feel like they have somebody in security that they can come in and hang out with if they have any questions. It also shows engineers, hey, I can build useful tools and features. And then really important, bring that knowledge back to your security team. If you learn a bunch of stuff about how your app works or something, is like you should document that or give a presentation internally to your team so that if they need to do something like this, they're not starting from, you know, step 0 again. Like it's easier for that team because it is kind of a burden on that team. You know, it's not free labor. Like you need to get onboarded just the way that like a junior engineer would. Besides being from SF, does anyone know I have a picture of this here? We're trying to bridge the gap between security and engineering. So security is obviously nice maroon over here, and then engineers the dirty city. But yeah, this is the goal: is you want to have everybody working together. So I'm just going to go through a couple things about like what we're working on next. This is the security leaderboard. This is something that my manager is building right now. This is just to kind of keep track of all the incremental things that people do to help the security of our company. We want to recognize people for stuff, whether it's fixing vulnerabilities or coming to us and saying like, hey, I found this thing, or this bottom one, that was Frances helped me with the user experience for all the password stuff. She sat down with me and basically like taught me how to use React, so that was pretty awesome. And then we want to use this to help influence these people's annual reviews. We want to make sure that people like feel rewarded for these things. We want to give them conference passes or training or things like that shows like, hey, we value the contributions that you're making all the time to our program. The security leaderboard is going to get followed up with the CTF. We had a lot of success with our training, which is like CTF adjacent. Anything that you score during the CTF would obviously go onto the leaderboard. We want to work on an engineering to security embed. So we're currently embedding within engineering teams, but we want to do the opposite basically. There's a really great podcast, Absolute AppSec. If you haven't checked this out, I would highly recommend it. Episode 33 has John Melton. He's speaking at this. He talks about a lot of quick like static analysis wins that you can have. My favorite example is just having something that monitors your code base for when somebody adds a new route. Because if somebody's adding a new route, they're probably doing something new that you might want to know about. For us, that would be more analogous to like a new GraphQL root mutation or root query, but the idea is the same. This is a really great thing to partner with a developer on because they are already thinking about this code base all the time. They're probably going to solve this problem a lot more efficiently than you. They're already used to using our analytics tools and tracking and stuff like that. And I think that we could easily partner with a developer to whip up a dashboard of like routes added or like something like that that alerts us and it's like, okay, go take a look at this PR. We also want to focus on making more things self-service. A lot of the stuff that we've talked about has been like pretty heavyweight from a security standpoint, which I think is good in a lot of cases. But for smaller stuff, you don't want to get bogged down in process too much. We want to look at Slack's Go SDL for some of the design review stuff. We're in the process of formalizing our vulnerability management program. And as part of that, we're hoping, like this time next year, we'll have really good metrics to figure out like what is and isn't working. I would highly recommend checking out these conference presentations. John is actually presenting at LASCON, so I would definitely recommend checking that out. At the end of his talk, he has a slide full, it's like this, but even with more stuff, that has a bunch of things about security metrics. There's some good content in there. Hopefully you don't have to use any of this stuff. Sometimes it can be helpful. If you have some compliance requirements, sometimes there's stuff you have to do for that. If you've had stuff show up in recent pen tests, those get shown to customers. If you have things that people are asking from customer security questionnaires, that can be a good way to get stuff done. Ideally, you don't need to use this stuff, but just wanted to throw it in there in case. The bottom point, if you have built up a good network, it's easy to go to people and say like, hey, what are you doing for this? Like, companies X, Y, and Z are doing these things. So the main takeaways here, get involved, speak at stuff, write blog posts, invite security people to come to your office and hang out. That helps you build your dream team. Without them, you're not going to be able to be nearly as successful. Vulnerabilities are just bugs. I probably didn't emphasize that enough in the presentation, but the more that you get this concept like permeated through your culture, the way everything is gonna, or every vulnerability is gonna get treated just like a bug, which is what you want, because the more similar that security is to the rest of the business or to the rest of the engineering org, the better. Vulnerabilities have priority just like everything else, whether it's like something's messed up in the UX or like a feature that hasn't even been built yet. You just need to get things prioritized appropriately. You want to make sure everyone knows that security is part of their job. Everybody should be looking for security stuff as part of code reviews and whatever. You need to be thinking about security during design. You need to be knowing when to come talk to security. Again, I'm a huge fan of this concept of security judgment, like just having everyone educated on what is available to them, both from a knowledge and a tooling standpoint, and knowing like, hey, we have a security team here for a reason, like they're a resource. We're supposed to be able to go ask them for help. You also need to partner successfully cross-functionally. If you can't partner successfully within engineering, you're not going to be able to get big projects done with any sort of reasonable time frame. And the worst thing you can do, I think, is just be completely siloed. And it's like if security is just like over there, you know, doing whatever, we don't know what they do, is like, what value does that team have? Like, even if they're doing great stuff, is like people aren't going to have the right perception of your team. So you want to be able to be a team that people want to work with. Think about ways to reduce operational work. This is something that we could definitely do better on, but I think like having project work that reduces future operational work is really important, because if you wait until you're just all operational work, you don't have time to make your processes more efficient, which usually requires an upfront investment. Save your no's. Don't want to be the team that's saying no all the time. You want to be the team that's saying, like, let's figure out how to do this the right way. We don't want to slow developers down. We don't want them to be like, oh, the security people, they're so boring, like they just say no to everything. Like, we want to figure out how you can say yes safely. And most importantly, have fun. Be a team that people want to work with. Don't be known for like being a lame security team. Nobody wants to work with you because they'll just avoid you. And then just some kind of high level thoughts. Everybody here knows that security isn't something that you just like buy or hire people for and it just magically improves. Like every tough problem, whether it's reliability, scaling efficiently, or having a diverse workforce, it's something that requires cultural change from within your organization. You need support from the top down, from the bottom out, and the bottom up. It also isn't dev versus security. We're all on the same team. You got to hire the right people that can work with engineering and the rest of the business, because you need support from the whole company. You need engineers to fix stuff and write features. You need people to report suspicious emails, get in the habit of locking their computer, wearing their badge. We're all trying to provide something great for customers, whether it's new features, customer service, or just peace of mind that their data is safe. So with that, as promised, here's the slide link. If you want to take a picture of this and go back and check stuff out, it's all up there. Here's my Twitter handle. If this sounds like the type of security team that you want to be a part of, just like every other company, we are hiring. So, you know, if you want to talk about that or anything else, I'll be around the conference both days, and I'd love to chat with people. So, thanks LASCON for having me. I love Austin. It's probably the place I've been the most outside of California. So, happy to be here.